Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for recognizing me, and also to the distinguished chairman for his extraordinary leadership, which I'll address in a moment. Madam Speaker, when was the last time anyone ever asked you for $700 billion? It's a staggering figure. And many questions have arisen from that request, and we have been hearing, I think, a very informed debate on all sides of this issue here today. I'm proud of the debate. $700 billion, a staggering number, but only a part of the cost of the failed Bush economic policies to our country. Policies that were built on budget recklessness. When President Bush took office, he inherited President Clinton's surpluses, 4 years in a row, budget surpluses, on a trajectory of $5.6 trillion in surplus. And with his reckless economic policies, within 2 years, he had turned that around. And now, 8 years later, the foundation of that fiscal irresponsibility, combined with an anything-goes economic policy, has taken us to where we are today. They claim to be free market advocates when it's really an anything-goes mentality. No regulation, no supervision, no discipline. And if you fail, you will have a golden parachute, and the taxpayer will bail you out. Those days are over. The party is over in that respect. Democrats believe in a free market. We know that it can create jobs, it can create wealth, it can create many good things in our economy. But in this case, in its unbridled form, as encouraged, supported by the Republicans, some in the Republican Party, not all, it has created not jobs, not capital, it has created chaos. And it is that chaos that the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chairman of the Fed came to see us just about a week and a half ago. Seems like an eternity, doesn't it? So much has happened. The news was so bad. They described a very, very dismal situation. A dismal situation describing the state of our economy, the fragility of our financial institutions, and the instability of our markets, our equity markets, our credit markets, our bond market. And here we were listening to people who knew of what they spoke. Secretary of the Treasury brings long credentials and knowledge of the markets. More fearful, though, to me, more scary were the statements of Chairman Bernanke, because Chairman Bernanke is probably one of the foremost authorities in America on the subject of the Great Depression. I don't know what was so great about the Depression, but that's the name they give it. And we heard the Secretary and the Chairman tell us that this was a once-in-100-year phenomenon. This fiscal crisis was so drastic. Certainly once in 50 years, probably once in 100 years. And how did it sneak up on us so silently, almost on little cat's feet? That they would come in that day, and they didn't actually ask for the money, that much money, that night. It took 2 days until we saw the legislation that they were proposing to help calm the markets. And that was on that day that we learned of a $700 billion request. But it wasn't just the money that was alarming. It was the nature of the legislation. It gave the Secretary of the Treasury czar-like powers, unlimited powers, latitude to do all kinds of things, and specifically prohibited judicial review or review of any other federal administrative agency to review their actions. Another aspect of it that was alarming is it gave the Secretary the power to use any money that came back from these infusions of cash to be used at the discretion of the Secretary, not to reduce the deficit, not to go into the general fund so that we could afford other priorities, to be used at the discretion of the Secretary. It was shocking. Working together in a bipartisan way, we were able to make major improvements on that proposal, even though its fundamental basis was almost arrogant and insulting. The American people responded almost immediately. Overwhelmingly, they said they know that something needs to be done. Say 78% of the American people said Congress must act. 58% said, but not to accept the Bush proposal. And so here we are today, a week later and a couple of days later, coming to the floor with a product, not a bill that I would have written, one that has major disappointments with me, beginning with the fact that it does not have bankruptcy in this bill, and we will continue to persist and work to achieve that. It's interesting, though, to me that when they describe this, the magnitude of the challenge and the precipice that we were on, and how we had to act quickly and we had to act boldly and we had to act now, that it never occurred to them that the consequences of this market were being felt well in advance by the American people. That unemployment is up, and therefore we need unemployment insurance. That jobs are lacking, and therefore we need a stimulus package. So how can, on the one hand, could this be so urgent at the moment, and yet so unnecessary for us to address the effects of this poor economy in the households of America across our country? We'll come back to that in a moment. Working together, we put together some standards, and I am really proud of what Barney Frank did in this regard. The first night, that Thursday night when we got the very, very dismal news, he immediately said, if we're going to do this, and Spencer Baucus was a part of this as well, in terms of if we're going to do this, we must have equity for the American people. We're putting up $700 billion. We want the American people to get some of the upside. So equity, fairness for the American people. Secondly, if they were describing the root of the problem as the mortgage-backed securities, Barney insisted that we would have forbearance on foreclosure of those. If we're now going to own that paper, that we would then have forbearance to help responsible homeowners stay in their home. In addition to that, we have to have strong, strong oversight. We didn't even have to see the $700 billion or the full extent of their bill to know that we needed